Chapter 2. Begin at the beginning. Always a good place to begin. Oh, she got her cute ponytail going on already. 2 days later, I was still lying low at Reuben's place. You will never leave. My brain damage was recovering from the neuron therapy treatments I'd been prescribed, so that was a relief. Everything else, though? Let's just say brain damage might be the least of my worries. The media frenzy over my story had died down some over the last couple of days, which was a relief, but the story wasn't even close to forgotten. Reuben was taking excellent care of me, though. He'd been on leave so he could stay home with me, and while he sometimes fielded work calls, he hadn't left me alone in the house even once. Wow. The TPPS had been poking him about my current living situation and his relation to me. He didn't come out and say it, but I got the feeling they may have been thinking of keeping me in his care for the time being and listing him as my official protective agent. Well, ain't that just the thing? Darn, I guess if we have to. He'd made an offhand remark that the Esper division was occasionally called in for it when the person being protected was an Esper. I didn't know how he'd feel about my staying in his care, and I was afraid to ask. So for now, I was focusing on recovering. He was doing his best to help. He was thoughtful, too. Honestly, the sort my mother would definitely call boyfriend material. You don't say. In fact, she had called him that when I told her about him earlier in our conversation. The first we were having since my arrival in Cerna. Man, you're talking to your mom already, too? That's awesome. And she's like, honey, I just want you to know I support you in this endeavor. He's good boyfriend material. Oh, hello?
Morgan?
My attention was pulled back to said conversation when Mom called my name. She's busy thinking about, like, yeah, Reuben's really boyfriend material. Mom, like, hello? I'm here. Sorry, Mom. Still a little tired. What were you saying?
I was asking if you're dealing with the media lurking out in front of this place where you're staying.
No one knows my exact location, so they wouldn't know where to camp. Is it really bad at your place?
It's not as much anymore. Most of them left after we repeatedly told them we hadn't heard from you. And the ones who stayed have lost interest the more we refused to speak to them. One caught Brian as he was on his way home yesterday, but Endgame is still guarding us, so they came to his rescue.
That was upsetting. I'd never even considered the possibility my being an Esper would affect my family and their safety. The thought of someone using them to get to me, or just harassing them in my name, I hadn't thought they'd need guarding at all. I'm so sorry, Mum. I know it must be so frustrating for everyone.
Morgan, sweetie, you have nothing to apologize for. We're just glad you're safe. I'm the one who's sorry. I should have realized what was going on with you all this time.
How are you supposed to realize that?
I'm your mother. I should have known. If I had, I could have helped.
Mum, it's enough that one family member blatantly ignored Esper regulations. I don't think we needed the entire family to be in on it.
Why not? Things like this should be done as a family.
I'm dubious about that. Some things shouldn't be a family affair, and breaking the law is one of them.
Tell that to Crimson and Noir. They're literal crime families.
See, Mom knows what's up. Are you suggesting I should have turned our family into a crime family to hide that I'm an Esper?
Everyone has to start from somewhere.
Mother! It was so nice to talk to her again. She's best mom. But a little timer chimed inside my head and I sighed. Of course. Mum, unfortunately it looks like our time is up. Sorry. But like I mentioned before, I'm not technically allowed to access this network. Reuben's going out on a limb by allowing it, and he only did it because he knows it's secure. But the longer we talk, the more likely someone will notice. Okay, so Reuben's pulling some favors for you. Girl, you have some sway with these guys, I tell ya.
Honestly, One day you're a normal student, and the next you're having to use secret channels to communicate with your family in case some mob boss on the other side of the planet is listening in.
Well, you know me. Always getting into trouble.
You've never been in trouble in your life. I guess that's why you went all out for your first attempt.
A smile washed over my face, but vanished as fast.
Morgan, please keep us informed as much as you can. I know it'll be hard, but the moment you don't have to sneak onto secure channels, please call.
I will. I promise.
And be safe.
I'll do my best on that one. Trust me.
And tell Detective Kellner how grateful we are to him.
Yes, I will relay that too. Mom just can't stop talking. She has something very important she has to say about this very attractive young detective, though, I see. So I'll allow it.
And don't do anything irresponsible while staying alone with an attractive young detective who is very, very single. I looked up his profile, you know. He's quite handsome.
Right. By irresponsible, do you mean something like nearly getting myself arrested by Endgame, then evading arrest and being attacked by mysterious people in the rain? Then teleporting myself into someone's lap in a panic?
Yeah, no. I'm definitely talking about sleeping with him before being treated to dinner.
Mom! She's got her priorities straight. Dinner is an awfully low threshold for sleeping with a stranger being a responsible decision, Mum. She was such a brat sometimes. I would pity Dad if not for how often she dragged him in and made him side with her.
I love you, Morgan. We all do.
I love all of you too. I miss you.
We know.
I didn't want to disconnect. I wanted to talk to her for so much longer and just listen to her voice and reassure myself it was going to be okay. But we disconnected a few seconds later, and I drew my knees up to my chest, letting out another frustrated sigh. I was glad they were all okay. Glad they had been understanding. And I wish more than anything I could be with them and talk with Mum more. I always relied on her so much through things like this. And now they felt so far away, and my ability to talk to her was limited. At least for now. Girl, you don't know how good you got at this route. If you want to talk about limited, I got some roots for you. It was just that with all the interest in my story, it would be best to be wary of how I spoke about it since we didn't know who could be listening in. And I couldn't deny it would be irritating to say something offhand to Mum on a call, only to have Endgame leap out of the shadows with an accusatory, "Aha!" Anyway, I didn't want to think about all that this early in the morning. Not that it's all that early. Reuben was moving around in the kitchen, so I dragged myself off the bed to finish getting dressed so I could join him. I was still thinking over the call with Mum when I stepped around the corner into the kitchen a short while later, to be confronted with Reuben making breakfast. Just casually shirtless. Could you imagine frying something though, and then like the oil splatters on your well-defined abs? Ow! With shirt slung over his shoulder instead of on his body. Oh God. Mom's comment about the very attractive detective popped up and smacked me right in the face. I could almost hear the phrase, irresponsible decisions, echoing in my brain. Hey, does making breakfast for you count as like taking you out for dinner? Or is that a little higher on the Mum scale? I would think it would rate a little higher, so I think Mum's okay with it now. My face went hot. Mum... I hastily turned away, refusing to stare at him despite an intense urge to be irresponsible in that very moment. Someone being shirtless was not grounds for being gawked at. I wanted to get control of my facial expression before he noticed me. This is definitely Mum's fault. Why did she have to say that? I took a deep breath and turned around, smiling as I fixed my eyes at a point beyond him and absolutely did not stare. Good morning. Hello.
Oh, Morgan. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
He looked around frantically before remembering the shirt was over his shoulder. Wait, so he's aware that, he's gawked at without a shirt on. He's like, I need to cover up. I'm indecent. He grabbed it and turned away. Like, he's not indecent at all, but he's just acting like, she caught me. I stared hard at the top of the bar until he was finished.
Sorry, I thought you were still talking to your mother. I'd gone to get dressed, but the eggs needed me, so I had to rush back out.
Oh, don't worry, it was no bother. I hope she doesn't realize what she said, because he's like, ugh. Oh, don't worry about that at all. I don't mind seeing... I mean, not that I was looking. Not that it's not worth looking. No, you know what? I'm going to just stop right there. Don't worry about it. I pressed a hand to my forehead, mentally kicking myself for whatever the hell that had been. Thirst. It was thirst. Reuben was watching me with a look torn between amusement and embarrassment. Which, yeah, that was fair. I had no idea how I'd botched that. Still Mum's fault.
You okay?
Yes, I am. And what I meant to say is that I have 4 brothers, so I'm used to seeing all states of undress. I was not shocked. And I'm going to stop talking now. He was still looking at me like, I don't know, like he might be worried the brain damage was worse than we thought. I was holding back the strangled groan. It had been a while, and Mum's remark about him being attractive enough to warrant irresponsible decisions was the primary culprit. But yikes! It's a yikes for me, dog.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it didn't startle you too much, but I'll try to be more careful.
Wow, Morgan, way to make things incredibly awkward. No, wait, I'm blaming Mum for this. Despite how much I was still berating myself for that bizarre display, I forced as relaxed a smile as I could manage. Well, you couldn't help it, right? The eggs needed you.
They did. But even so, I should remember that I have a house guest right now.
It's still your house. You're allowed to be comfortable.
Well, maybe, but still.
Ugh, so awkward. Wanting to look at anything else but Reuben now that I'd made things weird, I turned from him and leaned my back against the bar. Because the news report on the screen across the room was definitely interesting and needed my absolute attention. Yep. Oh wait, it actually was something interesting. I watched in silence for a moment. You know, maybe I was being naive, but I expected to cycle out of the news faster than this.
They'll discuss it into the ground as long as it's generating views and traffic. And given Endgame's latest statement, I suppose they feel there's more to talk about.
Endgame's statement is just more of the same tactic of pushing blame off to other groups.
Well, confirming you came into contact with one of Crimson's guys and made a daring escape with your newfound Esper abilities certainly bolsters their previous claims.
Jack, you got me into trouble. I still can't believe Jack is a member of Crimson. He seemed... nice?
Yeah, well, I've been doing my own digging regarding Jack Visser now that Endgame is throwing him under the bus. He used to be a member of Endgame, you know. Not that it's information most people will be able to dig up as easily.
You are a very good detective. He what?
My contact said he defected to Crimson about 10 years ago. You know the name of the previous queen was Sylvia Visser, right?
Relatives?
I assume so. Personal information on agents is pretty limited, and my contact wouldn't say much more. But I guess that's neither here nor there. Endgame is using his current affiliations to stress the gravity of the situation you were in. And your family, of course.
And the greater public.
Of course. All to justify their actions.
Yeah, well, I still can't believe there was no other way to handle the situation.
I assume many people feel that way. But they're sticking to their claim that their concern for your family being targeted was why they wish to apprehend secretly. If no one knew who was responsible for your disappearance or who had acquired you, there wouldn't be a point in risking going after your family.
Yeah, it's a pity they didn't explain any of that at the time. Not even a, "come with us if you want to live," or something. The more I think about it, the more I have time to rehash it all, the angrier I get. What kind of absolute idiot decided it would be best to keep me in the dark?
I suppose they'd say they didn't know who was listening or watching. If Crimson knew you were with Endgame, they might try to leverage your family against you. But that wouldn't work if you were with Noir or anyone else. And if you didn't know you were with Endgame, how would anyone else?
Yeah, but Crimson clearly knew. And Endgame knows that.
But the general public doesn't know how much Crimson knew about you. Or anyone else.
Ugh. And now I was getting worked up again. An exaggerated sigh worked its way out as Reuben pushed a plate and cup of coffee my way. It smelled amazing. Eggs, some sort of sausages, and what looked like potato pancakes as well. I leaned my elbows on the bar, pulling the mug closer so I could glare into it. Maybe I was being ungrateful for not appreciating Endgame's attempt to keep me safe. I still hated how they went about it. At least they're taking responsibility for the damage that little car chase caused, I guess. I'm sure the Sasalas Council is pleased to have them pay for it.
Huh. Endgame can almost always spin something like that in their favor, so long as no one was hurt. And that's all any of this is. Just endless spinning.
Seems exhausting.
I find it to be. But in the end, all big organizations are like this, no matter how noble their supposed cause.
All of them? Really?
Probably sounds cynical to say, but yeah. All of them, in my opinion.
He joined me, flopping down on a bar stool with a plate of his own.
Eventually, it seems like they all retreat to the shadows, hoard secrets, and start serving themselves more than the people they're meant to protect. Hell, even Utpal can be like that if you look at the organization as a whole. Individuals are different. But in the end, we're also beholden to the organizations we work for. So sometimes it's our duty to also guard those secrets and serve the organization over the cause.
He was right. That did sound cynical. But I didn't get the sense he was a cynical person by nature. Which just made it feel like he had a good reason for feeling that way. Endgame is supposed to be the good guy, you know.
They do a lot of good, but that doesn't mean the organization is good. And what do we expect, really? They are shrouded in secrecy and have no accountability. Of course, that fosters bad behavior and overstepping. Half the time, no one even knows they're overstepping, and the other half they don't call it out because it's in the name of public safety. As if that makes it all better. Fortunately, I have enough connections that we could call it out this time. That's why I told you to prepare yourself for this to last a while. It's not every day that we get to have a conversation about Endgame stepping on civilian rights. Ugh. Sorry. I didn't mean to rant about it again.
I don't mind hearing your rants. Remember, I actively avoided ever talking about any of this. The only person I ever discussed Esper things with was my ex. And it was just because he was studying them. The policies and all of that, I'm really ignorant of. It doesn't get discussed in New Albion as part of the regular political discourse, and I would have avoided it anyway. So, hearing your opinions is interesting now that I can't exactly avoid it anymore. To be honest, now that I'm in the middle of it, I'm curious what you think about... well... about how you navigate protecting everyone's rights when people like me exist. It seems complicated.
It's a complex knot, yes. If there was a simple answer to that, I think we'd have implemented it by now. But I guess one thing I'd like to see is more high-ranking Espers in normal departments like mine, so we don't have to rely on Endgame for everything. That reliance on them to solve these kinds of problems just solidifies the idea that we can't function without them. This idea that the general populace needs protection from Espers as a collective is flawed from the start. The idea we need a peacekeeping force to act as a shield, and a specific Esper is either the shield or the reason we need the shield. I don't agree with it. I understand why people are wary of the danger Espers can cause, but I think the issue is more nuanced than our current laws can manage. Statistically speaking, did you know there should be at least 10 queen ranks somewhere in the solar system, and almost as many king ranks? Only a few are accounted for, so where are the rest of them? Living peacefully, somewhere the way you were, maybe not even aware of their abilities.
That is interesting. It's obvious regulating Espers stems more from fear of harm they could do than the idea we are running wild in the streets on a daily basis.
Yes, but the preemptive curtailing of freedom is not the solution. Nor is giving one organization license to do so at will. Espers are no less deserving of protections than everyone else, and I feel our current laws are weighted in favor of the majority, specifically in ways that have allowed Endgame to take advantage of their broad wording and allowed others to ignore the problem.
So it comes back to new legislation.
It usually does.
I poked at my food, wondering how many times I'd have this same conversation over the next few weeks.
Food not to your liking?
No, it looks delicious. As usual. It had only been a few days, but I kept finding myself surprised he seemed to eat properly and be a decent cook, despite the strong bachelor vibes. We gotta give the boys credit in this universe, you know? They all seem to be pretty decent at cooking. Not that a bachelor couldn't be a good cook, but in a high-stress job like his, I had this odd mental image of him running out of the house with a cup of coffee in hand and half a bagel crammed in his mouth. Of course, I had no idea what he was like when he didn't have a guest. Maybe he did run out of the house with half a bagel in his mouth in the mornings. But I got much better fare than that. The eggs turned out great despite the egg emergency. You're a surprising good cook.
You can thank my parents, though mostly my father. He always used to insist my sister and I help with dinner, and he refused to let us leave home without knowing how to put a decent meal together.
He's a good dad. I can cook, but I wouldn't say I'm good. More like adequate. And my mother is always getting on to me about eating better.
Dad's a chef, so I suppose it was especially important to him. But adequate is all you need, really.
After standard university student fare for a while, you might disagree. The day we met, I was going to get food because my kitchen was literally empty. And then those jerks made me lose my tangerines. Not the tangerines!
I'm sure it's much harder when you're living on your own and trying to maintain healthy study habits, or stay at the top of your class like you did. Especially in New Albion's system.
New Albion's notorious system.
I imagine it's brutal. It's hard for me to imagine. I was already out of school by the time I was your age.
I love how you say that like you're so much older than me when you can't be much more than 40.
43, actually.
So old. So funny. He laughed at my gentle teasing, grinning at me over the edge of his coffee cup.
Not old, no. But certainly older than you are.
Barely. My oldest brother is older than you, I hope you realize. But I guess it feels different being well into your career rather than in school still. But there are people my age who will be studying long after I'm finished as well. Maybe I should have chosen a field that would have had me out of school and off Arcalis faster.
Because you'd have been gone by now, and Endgame would be less likely to find you or come after you.
Well, that's true. I can't deny that's part of why I wanted to work off-world. Which probably sounds selfish to a public servant like you.
I think it's an understandable feeling, one shared by a lot of people. It's relatively known that Espers sometimes go to Syrah to avoid recruitment into Endgame too. I'm sure they'd go to other places if it was less expensive to get there. No one likes having their future chosen for them.
I didn't know if he believed that or was just saying it to make me feel better, but it worked, so I had to give him that. He could have been so much more judgmental about my decisions, but he always seemed willing to consider my side. I wrapped my hands around the still warm coffee, smiling a little. Thank you for always being so understanding, Reuben.
That isn't something you have to thank me for, Morgan. I'm not going out of my way to try to understand your situation. And I don't think it's that great a thing to sympathize with where you're coming from. Everyone has their own story.
I think it's easy to forget that, though. In Cisalis, there was always such pressure to conform. The people with their own stories were left behind. The rest of us did our best to fall in line and just contribute.
It's not like that everywhere. And I just think that it would be difficult to deal with the prospect of your life being dominated by something outside your control. It's something I've never had to consider personally. I think that diminishes my ability to judge. It's not ideal that you chose to not register. Like it or not, that's the law for Esper children in New Albion. But from what you say, you didn't realize you were an Esper until you were older. And by that time, well, I can also understand the complicated feelings. As a pseudo-Esper, there was never a reason for me to worry about Endgame, but I do remember the feeling I had when registering. It was strange to feel singled out. I imagine that's amplified when you're a full Esper.
I didn't know you were a pseudo-Esper.
It's not as great as it sounds, so there's not much reason to brag about it. It's sometimes a little useful. Good instincts and all that. But that pit I get in my stomach when I know something is wrong or when I know someone is lying is incredibly hard to ignore. It's this kernel of worry that follows me and dogs my thoughts for days, for months, years sometimes. I suppose that's why I can consider the possibility that your anxiety about Endgame was something similar. Something you couldn't ignore.
You think so? I had never considered the possibility of some kind of precognitive ability being at the core of that anxiety. I mean, I couldn't rule it out, but I think that's a very generous assumption. The truth is, I just already had my own aspirations by then, and I was afraid of losing those dreams. Which is probably not a very good excuse.
I think the line between an excuse and a reason is razor thin anyway. And in any case, what's done is done. Ruminating on it changes nothing.
Then let's talk about something else for a while. Like you. I feel like we've examined my history, situation, the timeline of my childhood, my life plans for days. Why don't you tell me more about yourself? I still don't know that much about you.
Unfortunately, I can say with confidence that I'm the least interesting person in the house at the moment.
Anyone who can calmly handle someone materializing out of the air and falling on them is sure to have an interesting backstory.
Hardly. I just recognize teleportation when I see it.
Okay, fair. So, you're boring. I understand. But also, I'm still curious. Why did you go into public service?
I don't have an interesting reason for that either. I just wanted to help people, I suppose. I like solving problems, so it felt like a good fit for me.
Not wanting to make the world a better place?
No, I don't have any illusions about correcting injustice or anything like that. Most of the time, we're not called in until an injustice has occurred, and you can't just fix that. You can't undo a crime. But I suppose preventing as much injustice as possible, or putting a stop to ongoing injustices, isn't a bad mission either. That said, you burn out fast when you convince yourself you'll make a noticeable difference in the world. I'm hardly a jaded veteran, but even I've seen that happen more than once. I tend to focus on the differences I can make for individuals and try to let that be enough.
Sometimes that is enough.
But that's a romantic view of the job, if I'm being honest. The reality is that it's a lot of long hours and feeling like you're stuck in one place without...
He trailed off and let out a low laugh as if there had been a joke in there I missed. He gave me an apologetic smile.
I guess none of that is actually what you asked. That's the danger of asking me a question like that.
I never said I didn't want to hear it.
I'm sure it's not interesting to listen to me ramble about how dull and stressful my job is.
Why not? Besides, most jobs are more boring than most people think. It's the same in my field, too. People hear archaeology and picture exploring old ruins and digging up bones or something. I mean, that's part of it when you're in the field. But there's a surprising amount of dull work that happens in a lab. Sorting through boxes, labeling things, piecing together broken artifacts. And there is so much report writing. So much.
Ugh, same.
I laughed as we let out simultaneous groans. My point is that I don't find it boring to listen to you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you indulging me.
Besides, I've seen your home office. Not only is it a disaster, but there's also that huge board on the back wall, and that looks interesting.
I didn't know you'd looked in there.
You've left the door open a couple of times. It's interesting to see someone keep notes organically like that, pinning paper notes to a board instead of it all being digital. That's much more like my mental image of a detective. You even have the hat stand. Stop, he has a hat stand?
That was a joke gift from my sister. I absolutely do not wear that hat.
You should start! I love that your sister gifted you a hat stand with a hat. What a shame.
And most of the notes in there aren't for work, but personal research.
Personal research into what?
It's not that interesting. I
leaned my hand on my chin and gave him an expectant smile. He responded with a low chuckle as he drained the rest of his coffee, then stood to get more.
Remember how I said that sometimes it's difficult to ignore my gut feelings?
Mm-hmm. He held up the coffee pot, silently asking if I wanted more, but I shook my head. He poured himself another cup.
While in this line of work, you come across a lot of things that go unexplained or unsolved. Cases that go cold because you can't find the trail of evidence leading to a conclusion. You notice incongruities in stories, in news. You hear odd rumors that lead nowhere. And those things just sit at the back of my mind gnawing at me. So I developed a habit of researching those kinds of incongruities in my spare time. A pastime, in a way. I spend a lot of hours chasing down little clues or leads for different things. Seeing it up on a board like that lets me connect things together in different ways, or visualize it more clearly. That habit eventually led to chasing down leads on other types of stories and rumors too. At this point, I guess you could say it's almost like a compulsion.
Other types of stories and rumors? What types?
Just, you know.
I don't know, actually.
Here's an example. 3 months ago, one of the major Ouroboros tunnels between Cerna and Delphine was damaged. They had to shut it down for 2 weeks for repairs. Officially, there was an underwater volcanic eruption that caused a series of minor seismic events which damaged the tunnel. Seems normal enough, but when I saw the report, something didn't sit right, so I went digging. None of the National Geologic Services reported a volcanic eruption near there. It just so happens that I'm aware of a few non-public research facilities in the area.
Out there In the ocean?
Yes, submerged research facilities. Coincidentally, a few information sources I watched started reporting that one of Delphine's labs sustained massive damage from some kind of explosion. The entire lab had to be evacuated, and it just so happens that it's within the vicinity of the damaged tunnel. Interestingly, the earliest rumors about the lab were from before the public announcement about the tunnel damages. So what could a lab out there be working on that caused an explosion big enough to damage the transit tunnels? And who is connected with it that the public reports all blame non-existent volcanic activity?
You know, when you talk about secret government facilities in the ocean, it starts to sound like conspiracy theories. Is that the lab where Brennan and Rory were being held too? By the by?
Sometimes, yeah. I won't deny it.
I wouldn't have taken you for a conspiracy theorist, or you said this is something of a compulsion. Yeah, let's be flexible. This is his hobby we're talking about, and it is suspicious. You said this is something of a compulsion. Do you believe it all, or do you do it to quiet that inner voice a little?
That depends on the topic, I guess. But in most cases, I suppose it's a bit of both. With unresolved criminal cases, there's often nothing to believe or not believe. I just spend time chasing cold leads because I want to see the case solved. With the things you could conceivably label a conspiracy theory, I don't know. I don't trust organizations, and it's easy to spot questionable behavior if you look close enough. I would be the first to tell you there's a lot of nonsense out there, though. And even if you're not looking into the more outrageous rumors, you still have to sift through it. And by outrageous, I mean things like the belief that 90% of the human population on Arcalis was replaced long ago, and most of us are now neo-humans.
Ah, well that's a fun theory. People believe that.
Oh yes. And there's a whole litany of telltale signs that help you recognize who's human and who isn't.
Amazing.
But things like that aren't the focal point of my research. They're not verifiable, they're outlandish. And the goal is to be able to target people with accusations, right? It's fueled by the fear of the other and all of that. That's not what I'm interested in. What's not a theory is that a hell of a lot of stuff goes on in the shadows on this planet, and sometimes it hurts people. Some of the most terrifying groups out there are involved, and yet some of our most respected organizations have their fingers in it too. Look at what happened to you. If anyone had captured you, it would have been the direct result of secret plans to do so. Perhaps not so much with Endgame, but with anyone else, you'd have become an unsolved crime, a missing person whose fate might never be discovered. And it would have been the result of conspiracies to obtain a new queen rank, perpetuated by some of the most notorious factions on the planet, and perhaps even one or two government groups. I mean, Noir is pretty notorious, for example, for doing human experimentation with regard to Espers. There are rumors, and some indirect evidence, of Delphine's government doing the same. And there are threads faintly connecting them to a disappearance here or that strange disturbance off in some isolated dome. That's the kind of stuff that draws my attention, or that I end up with a compulsion to solve. The thought that these groups are going after individuals. Dozens of Espers go missing every year on this planet. How much of that is connected to people going after them? The way people went after you? I think about that and I just want answers. I want...
To fix it?
to do what I can to stop it, yeah.
I guess it's even more difficult to ignore when you've got that gut instinct about things, huh?
You have no idea.
You also strike me as the sort that struggles to relax. Like your version of relaxing is to pore over obscure information while trying to connect unsolved cases to each other.
You've not been here nearly long enough to know me that well.
Well, consider it a theory of my own.
Hopefully that explanation does make me seem a little less out there, though.
Well, it's not like there aren't a lot of bizarre conspiracy theories in my area as well. So my mind did immediately go to a strange place.
That's fair. I'm sure there's a lot more speculating in your field, since we know so little about the history of this planet still.
Basically. I have to admit I'm curious about your research now. I mean, the specifics of some of the cases you've looked into. Or are looking at.
Well, maybe I can share some of it later. I don't know how interesting you'll find it if you delve in. It's not exactly Thalassan ruins.
I was much more interested in Senecan culture anyway. I let out a regretful laugh. I don't think I'll be studying Thalassan or Senecan ruins anytime soon.
I'm sorry, everything has been thrown into chaos for you.
None of that is your fault. If anything, you've offered me a continued sense of normalcy in it all. As much normalcy as is possible, anyway.
Speaking of normalcy, I was thinking that maybe I could take you around the city tomorrow. Get you out of this house, get your mind off things. Seems like you've recovered enough to manage as long as we don't overdo it.
I've been feeling a little cooped up, so seeing more of this dome might be nice.
Excellent. Then we can plan on that. I know a few good spots I reckon you'd like.
It's a date.
Places that aren't as crowded as other parts. Though this subdome isn't exactly a megacity in the first place.
Of course, he was already thinking ahead to things like crowd size. He always seemed to think of everything. I glanced at him, intending to ask something about this subdome, but his head was tipped oddly to the side, eyes gone far away. Then he smiled at me as he stood.
I need to take this call, if that's alright.
No problem, of course. We had both finished eating, so as he moved into the living area, I stood and started to gather up our dishes. He caught my eye from near the hallway and motioned for me to leave it. But I ignored him and continued, smirking as I deliberately stacked our plates. He gave me an exasperated but amused look before he stepped into his study to finish the call. It was nice to be cared for so intently, but it made me feel a little guilty. Receiving care without giving anything back was somehow stressful? Maybe that was just the new Albionin in me. Reuben had helped me so much already that clearing the breakfast dishes was the very least I could do. A frown passed over my face as I carried everything around the bar and into the kitchen to rinse them. I couldn't say how long it would last, this little bubble I was hiding in. I would be fortunate if it was permanent, but I knew it couldn't be. In the moments Reuben chatted about other things, I could almost forget the sword hanging above my head, ready to fall at the slightest shake-up. But when I was alone, it became ever-present in my thoughts, a specter that grew in size the longer I tried to ignore it. Despite that I was, apparently, some super-powered Esper who had spent years hiding in plain sight, I wasn't good enough to see even a few seconds into the future, much less days and weeks. Maybe it was better not to know, but I could use the comfort right about now. I made quick work of cleaning up, then moved to the nearby window, basking in the warm sun filtering in. I could only take one day at a time right now, couldn't I? If this momentary pause could just last a little longer, though. A few more days. Maybe then I would be ready to face whatever would come next. Eventually I would have to face it, but not yet. Not yet.